The girl, who was 5 years old, was unaware that giving up her bread would bring a hole. The next morning, the tribe was brought to their knees. However, as young Lily Clark approached the quiet indigenous child huddled behind the wooden barrels, holding on to her tiny meal, she was going to start moving. Two worlds would be changed by it, forever. The sun hung long in the afternoon. Across the dusty main street, shadows moment she was first seen by Lily, a slender person no more senior than herself, with lengthy black hair draped like a veil all around her face. The youngster sat behind the supply barrels, still outside. The general store owned by Clark, her dark eyes observing the residents of the town as they go by without a single gesture or phrase. The majority of people rushed by, their gazes purposefully staying away from the tiny, still form. Lily was assisting her mom. Sarah set up the fresh bolts of cloth when she was frozen by the sight. The girl's clothing was worn and patched, her bare feet on the coarse wooden planks. However, the manner in which she held herself, which caused Lily's chest to constrict, with something she had not yet been able to identify. The youngster appeared to be attempting to vanish, to become as imperceptible as the dancing dust motes in the afternoon illumination. Without hesitation, Lily gripped the large piece of cheese and bread that she had been offered lunch by her mother. Her little fingers encircled the meal as she observed the girl's gaze follow a lady bringing freshly made pies from the bakery. The desire in their quiet eyes was obvious, even to a 5-year-old. Samuel, her father, appeared behind her. The counter, proclaiming with his bulky boots his presence upon seeing the indigenous youngster. His face grew stern. Lily entered the house. That one isn't appropriate. In this place, Lily, however, was immobile. She got up. Motionless, observing the girl who appeared to holding her breath, she awaits the unavoidable order to depart. The youngsters, her hands were flat against her stomach, and Lily realized that motion. She had already witnessed it when her own stomach hurting from starvation during the lengthy winter months when supplies were scarce low. Lily's eyes briefly locked with the girl's. Take a moment. Additionally, in that fleeting relationship, they exchanged something that neither was able to comprehend. However, both could feel both hope and terror in such gloomy times. Depths. Lily's heart was pinched. Confined to her chest, her mom showed up. In the doorway, cleaning her of flour hands on her apron. Samuel, what's incorrect? Sarah's tone contained a hint of worry as she adhered to her husband's stern look. The indigenous child started to rise, obviously getting ready to escape the increasing interest. Her motions were cautious and silent, like a deer detecting risk. However, as she pulled her thin, Lily wrapped a shawl across her shoulders and made a choice that would have an impact on both communities for future generations. She moved ahead with her tiny bare feet, quiet across the wooden planks, and she held her plate out to the girl. Are you hungry? The straightforward query lingered in like smoke from a fire in the distance. Samuel took a sharp breath, and it was audible, and Sarah reached out to touch her throat. The indigenous child froze. Fully, something huge in her eyes between fear and incredulity. However, what transpired subsequently would demonstrate that some movements that go beyond all fear and miscommunication that grown-ups create from one planet to another. Additionally, by tomorrow morning, the elders of the tribe would show up with something that would silence everyone in the town. The local child gazed at the bread that was being presented, as though it would disappear like the mist of daybreak. Her slender fingers shook a little, but she refrained from grabbing the food. Rather, her dark gaze flitted uneasily from Lily's naive expression and the two adults who remained motionless in the rear doorway. Samuel moved forward, speaking solid but low. Lily took a step back, but his daughter remained still. She went on after the cheese and bread. She blue eyes stared at the girl who was hungry. Ahead of her, Mama prepared extra. You are able to take mine? The lips of the indigenous child opened up a little, as though she wished to talk, but nothing came out. She had been quiet so long that several people in town muttered that she was unable to talk at everything. Once more, she looked down at the food. Lily was able to observe the war unfolding throughout her features. extreme hunger, overcoming ingrained caution. Sarah drew nearer, her mother instincts taking precedence over her husband's rejection. She crouched next to Lily, examining the slender youngster who appeared to be squinting inside. "What's your name, my love?" For a long time, just the whistling sound of the wind, the silence was filled by the wooden buildings. Then, just above, a murmur, the young woman uttered her first words that anyone in the community had ever heard. The name Ayana, which held the tune of an alternative tongue. Rushing across stones like water, Lily carefully repeated it, evaluating the she-made noises with her tongue. Ayana, that Samuel's expression was pretty, softened in spite of himself. He had never heard the youngster talk previously, and the moment for some reason gave him pause. However, years of hostility between the town and the tribal community in the vicinity placed a great burden on his shoulders. That's when Ayana's stomach decided to roar loud enough to be heard, which made Lily's even more assured of the choice. She put the food next to the girl on the barrel. I took a step back to give her room. "It's excellent. The greatest bread is made by Mama, with motions as cautious as an untamed animal moving toward the ocean." Ayana arrived at for the sacrifice. She shut her fingers. The bread, and she carried it to her lips with awe that conveyed too many days of hunger. The initial bite seemed to take her by surprise in terms of flavor, as her black eyes began to well up with tears. "She's just a little girl," Sarah said, her own voice uttered to her husband full with feeling. Samuel observed as his daughter took a seat on the wooden planks next to Ayana, whispering regarding the several kinds of bread that she mom baked. The indigenous child paid attention, carefully eating and nodding occasionally, but not yet speaking beyond that one common name. As the midday shadows lengthened, but neither Sarah nor Samuel saw the figure, observing from the ridge outside the town. And an elderly indigenous guy sat quietly on his horse, taking in the amazing scene happening in front of the general store. What he saw there would sustain him, returning to his people with information that would alter everything, due to the fact that by sunrise, the tribal council would decide. That would determine if compassion could properly fill the gap between two universes that had become afraid of one another. The following morning brought in strange silence that seemed to last its breath. Before the sun rose, Lily awoke. The window was pressed by tiny hands. While she looked into the empty containers where Ayana had sat the previous day, the area appeared empty without the reserved girl who had listened to her and given her bread. Tailies of the various clouds in the heavens. Samuel had already put on his clothes and walking around the shop when someone made a noise. He froze at the counter. It began as a faint rumble, like thunder in the distance, but developed into a rhythmic and intentional. He went outside and sensed his throat tightens every breath. Arriving, the main roadway was lined with a parade. The town had never seen anything like it before. The group was led by Chief Running Bear, his aged face grave but not antagonistic. 12 tribal elders rode behind him, their horses that move in perfect harmony. However, it was the item they were carrying that made Samuel's heartbeat accelerated with ambiguity. Every rider had presents. Blankets made by hand and hues that the essence of sunset seems to be captured. Sculpted wooden objects that shone with meticulous workmanship. Paintings on pottery using patterns that conveyed tailies from earlier more than the actual town. Additionally, in the middle of the procession, 2 guys strolling beside the horses, was something that caused Samuel to retreat unwillingly. Sarah showed up next to her, Lily's spouse, holding on to her mother's skirt as she looked about to see just what it was taking place. "What do they do, Samuel?" "Desire." The procession came to a halt right in Clark's general store in front. The chief with the fluid running bear dismounted. The elegance of a man who had been in the saddle. His black gaze landed on Samuel's face, and briefly the pair of men just looked at one another during the years of suspicion that had caused their localities. "My folks enter." "Peace," said the chief in English. Clear but cautious. "We honor your daughter," Lily said, advancing. Prior to her parents intervening, her azure eyes that widened in amazement at the lovely objects that the tribe members carried. Did you come to see Ayana? The severe look on the face of Chief Running Bear relaxed as he gazed down at the tiny girl. My granddaughter is named Ayana. She spoke for the first time yesterday in numerous moons. She informed us about the white child who fed and cared for her kin. Samuel was struck by the phrases as a hit to the body. This entire time they had believed the youngster who was silent was an orphan, maybe lost or deserted. The truth that the tribal leader owned her. He altered everything regarding what had taken place the previous day. Sarah's her hand landed on her husband's arm and squeezed softly as comprehension emerged. Lily had not merely give food to a hungry child. She had shown consideration for the grandchild of the strongest man in the whole territory. However, what the leader would disclose the second reason why Ayana had been quiet, as well as what the tribe had introduced return for the kindness of one young girl would demonstrate that certain times are fated to change the course of all parties concerned. The Chief Running Bear's grizzled hands pointed to the presents from his people, but his eyes continued to focus on Lily's upside-down face. Ayana's voice went out when her last time parents went to the afterlife, winter, her words were uttered by the medicine men, had gone beyond the stars after them. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, and Samuel's chest constricted with unexpected feeling. The picture of the quiet toddler abruptly adopted new significance. So much grief that it had taken her speech. However, yesterday the chief went on, his tone conveying the weight of deep appreciation. She arrived speaking of home, blue eyes brimming with generosity. She explained to us how your daughter sat next to her, exchanged stories and snacks. It restored her sense of being seen. He hesitated, examining Lily as something gets closer respect. Your child's heart, she said, was so innocent that it brought back her voice, from the realm of the deceased. Lily approached the chief, her tiny hand extending to make contact with one of the elaborate blankets. Is Ayana superior? Will she return now? The harsh features of the leader pierced the Samuel's first-ever smile from him. She is currently with the elders, gaining proficiency with her recovered voice. She refers only to the golden-haired girl who demonstrated to her the existence of kindness in this world. Among the seniors, one moving ahead with something that made the recognizing gasps from the assembling audience. It was not a weapon, but rather a war shield. Of warfare, the surface of the leather was decorated with what appeared to be glimmer in the early morning. Additionally, the picture of two kids was in the middle, one with blonde hair that flows, one with their hands clasped in dark strands collectively. My father owned this, and his dad before him. Running Chief Bear clarified, it has safeguarded our family across many generations of conflict. We present it to your daughter now, not as a promise rather than a weapon. His throat was constricted as he tried to recognize the scope of what was taking place. Chief, we are unable to accept anything so precious. Lily was just showing kindness. Every youngster would say no. The chief's tone was stern without being harsh. Not just any kid. The majority of your folks cross the street upon observing my granddaughter. They mutter that she brings negative energy because she doesn't talk. Your daughter only saw another youngster in need of assistance. The group that had accumulated was getting bigger. Townspeople coming out of residences and stores to take in the momentous scene. Among Samuel observed faces, he acknowledged individuals who had in fact avoided the silence by crossing streets. The indigenous girl who had muttered about negative omens and curses. Lily raised her gaze to her father, and she was obviously confused. Innocent-looking features. Why wouldn't? You, Papa? Ayana is simply hungry, so can someone please aid her? The question lingered in the morning, melancholy. Air like smoke, making it difficult for any adult in attendance to assess their own hearts. Sarah sobbed as she knelt next to her daughter, fearing to overflow as she recognized the ease with which kindness had arrived to her infant without. The fears influenced the biases that had influenced the adults in her immediate vicinity. Bear in charge of running raised the shield of ceremony, and Samuel noticed a small trembling in his hands, with feeling. This shield will be suspended in your house as a representation. When my folks, they will recognize this family as companions. Your people will notice it and will never forget that one tiny gesture of kindness can alter a river's course. However, what followed would demonstrate that the chief's gifts were just the start of a change that would extend far transcend. A single town, family, or even a moment of innocence as a child. As the head-running bear was ready to deliver the shield to Lily, a ruckus broke out from the periphery of the group. Bradley Tom, the self-appointed spokesperson for the town and the largest ranch's owner, pressed through the event with a number of additional behind him are notable citizens. Now wait. On just a minute, Bradley said, cutting off Pierce the solemn setting like a blade. Thank you, Chief, for the gesture. However, we cannot have this type of structure that establishes a standard. Samuel felt his jaw tighten upon realizing the faces behind Bradley. Men who had invested years constructing barriers between the communities, who made money off of the anxiety and division that kept everyone isolated. These were the same individuals who had cautioned him not to allow those individuals too near his place of business. The chief running bear's face remained unchanged, however. Something changed in the surrounding air. The other elders of the tribe shifted their horses a little nearer, forming a shielding semicircle surrounding their head. Suddenly, the presents they carried appeared more like offers than their own shields. My daughter showed a youngster kindness. Samuel discovered himself speaking, taken aback by the power in his own words. I'm sorry for that, Bradley's expression reamed. Samuel, consider what you are doing. Your shop caters to all customers in this region. You begin picking sides, favoritism among the tribes, and you will lose clients, Christian. Clients who have helped your family years past, and Lily peered between the adults. Her innocence is clouded by confusion, characteristics she pulled on her mom's skirt. Why is that man upset, Mama? Ayanna was starving. The straightforward query appeared to hit the audience like Sarah knelt next to her as lightning struck. Daughter, gaining courage from the child's steadfast moral clarity, people. Overlook the fact that kindness has no circumstances, my love. One of the chief was silently addressed by tribal elders. In their mother tongue, running bear. With a solemn nod, the chief said the English-speaking audience. We have observed for several seasons in your community. We are aware which of you avoids crossing streets? Which of you speaks poison to our children regarding our methods? Which of you would observe us completely vanish? His eyes swept over Bradley and his backers with uncomfortably precise information. But yesterday we were warned by a young girl that hatred is not innately present in children's hearts. Instructed by individuals who have lost their own ability to love, the leader moved forward and took Lily's little hands in his worn ones. Youngster, will you agree to be my friend? Individuals? Before anybody could protest, Lily nodded gravely. Yes, sir. Tell me. Ayanna is welcome to eat my meal at any moment, desires. The leader's eyes gleamed as he raised the ceremonial shield. However, ready to put it in Lily's grasp, Bradley took an action that would compel everyone in attendance to select sides in a dispute that had been simmering for generations. And you display that item in your Samuel. Don't expect to see the store. Another $1 from good people. Bradley made a threat, his tone carrying throughout the quiet throng. What Samuel at that point, Clark made the decision to decide not just the destiny of his family, but if love or fear would lead the fate of a whole population. Samuel Clark found himself at the intersection of anything he had previously thought about survival, safety, and the significance of be a nice man. The threat from Bradley lingered. The air as if it were grass fire smoke. Samuel vowed to destroy everything with fire. Had constructed if he made a bad decision. He looking down at Lily, who continued to grip the chief's grizzled hands with full confidence. His daughter was unaware that her sharing bread might be expensive. Their store, their family, everything their source of income, their position in the neighborhood where they had lived for 5 years. Sarah took a position next to her husband. Her quiet presence statement of support. She had observed the terror in the eyes of those who mentioned the indigenous tribes. Had heard the muttering cautions about becoming too close, too amiable. But she also observed her daughter's innocence in, and something within her resisted to allow that purity to be tainted by mature biases. "You're committing an error, Bradley," pushed Samuel, noticing hesitancy. "Your family is dependent on this shop. Consider Lily's future. You wish for her to grow up in poverty, since you were only able to glimpse one instant of childish stupidity." The words deeply affected, discovering each father's greatest anxiety. Samuel felt the burden of weighing down on him with obligation as his gaze swept across the features in the crowd. While some expressed encouragement, others showed the same apprehension and disgust. Bradley said, and these were his clients, his neighbors, the individuals who had taken in his family when they initially chief running, there arrived and observed the internal conflict taking place on Samuel's face with comprehension that discussed his own challenging decisions. "We will not impose friendship where none exists." "Desired," he murmured. "If your people like the traditional methods, so we will honor that." However, as the chief started to take down the shield, something amazing occurred. Mrs. Henderson, the senior school teacher who didn't say anything until came forward from the audience now. "You don't speak for everyone, Tom Bradley." "U.S.," she asserted, "I've instructed kids from our community for 30 years. I have never witnessed anything greater, more lovely than what that little girl did yesterday," she said, turning to face Lily. "Honey, you showed us," she said with tears in her eyes, "all that true bravery looks like." Her something seems to be unlocked by words in the gathering. Other voices, one by one, started to increase. The wife of the baker described how Anna had sat quietly and never made any trouble, silently wishing for goodwill. The father described how his son had questioned why the indigenous girl was always looking. Samuel sensed the change occurring, and it was very sad on both sides of him, but Bradley wasn't done. "Fine words won't fill your tables with food. When disputes between tribes arise, believe that being amiable will keep you safe. When things become heated, you're all idiots if you think so." The eyes of the chief flashed a potentially harmful image, and Samuel became aware that they were getting close to a point at which this might go out of control anyone's authority. One incorrect phrase, one misread gesture, and the delicate moment might break into the type of savagery that would come back to haunt them both communities for many generations. In that Samuel Clark made the crucial decision at the one that would characterize not only his legacy of the family, but the prospects of with all eyes on him, he moved forward and put his palms on the ritual shield next to the main running bears. "I learned something from my daughter," Samuel said yesterday, in a crossing the abruptly quiet crowd. "She showed me that occasionally the riskiest action you can do is the appropriate action, and occasionally that's precisely why you must do it." What came next would demonstrate that bravery, similar to compassion, can spread when someone has the courage to accept the initial action. The ceremonial shield felt more substantial than Samuel had anticipated as he chief running. Bear then dropped it into Lily's tiny fists clasped together. The instant something was discharged by their fingertips, significant change in the atmosphere surrounding them, as though the atmosphere itself acknowledged the importance of what had just happened. Bradley gave a disgusted shake of his head and turned to go, but his forecast an exodus of supporters never happened. Rather, other townspeople stepped ahead, captivated by whatever they unable to precisely identify, but unable to opposition. Mrs. Henderson positioned her, the worn hand resting on Lily's shoulder in an act of pride and protection. "Thank you, Samuel," heard Chief Running Bear say. "You," his emotionally charged voice had been constructing for years. "You've provided something more valuable for my granddaughter compared to safety. You've given her hope that many people are able to see past their anxieties." As though called upon by his words, a tiny person showed up at the tribal procession's edge. Ayana came slowly, her black eyes gleaming with renewed self-assurance. When she reached Lily, she spoke intelligibly for everyone to listen. "According to my granddad, your Ayana's name means like a lily flower," stated, her voice more powerful than anyone's. "Have you ever heard it? In our native tongue, my name denotes an everlasting bloom. Perhaps that indicates we were meant to be pals, Lily said, smiled and moved the shield carefully to one arm in order to accept Ayana's hand. Could you please explain what do all the symbols mean? The appearance of the one youngster is blonde and the other dark-haired, studying the old protect one another while their communities observed in awe, produced a moment that would be recounted and remembered for generations. Although Samuel didn't cry, I know he's been holding back. As he became aware of what his daughter had completed, Chief Running Bear signaled his people, and they started dividing up the presents they had brought. Blankets given to families who have demonstrated kindness over the years in little ways. Objects with carvings for people who had never turned away as soon as Ayana showed up. For those who are open to sharing a meal across cultural boundaries, Sarah discovered herself taking in a lovely weaved basket from a woman from the tribe, who grinned and added, "The heart of your daughter appeals to our emotions. This is how peace starts." As the sun rose in the morning, higher, the official ceremony was replaced with something more organic and natural. Kids from both groups started to assemble around Ayana and Lily out of curiosity, conquering their parents' worries attempted to inculcate. Adults discovered themselves in discussions they never believed to be feasible, learning that there was common ground where they had never considered looking. The shield is now displayed with pride in Clark's retail establishment. Where it would stay for decades from now, tourists would inquire regarding its importance, and Samuel would tell them about his 5-year-old daughter whose actions transformed 2 worlds by an open heart and a piece of bread. That day, Bradley lost several clients. However, Samuel acquired something more valuable than cash. The understanding that when given the option to choose between considering principle and profit, he had decided to heed his daughter's advice and love without fear. Years later, when historians would write about the harmonious cohabitation that emerged between the tribal and the town neighborhood, they would link it to just one morning. However, those who were, they would never forget it. Not as a political moment, but in another way was a significant cultural event. But as the day a young girl demonstrated the necessity of kindness. No interpretation, and that bravery frequently comes in the tiniest possible packaging. If you like this tale, watch the video on your screen right now to view another enduring story in which kindness and the wild frontier is where bravery meets. Remember to subscribe and think about a super chat to assist us in providing you with further tales like these. Your assistance means a lot too.